Welcome to the Bad Roman Podcast. On this show, we talk with veterans, community leaders, Christians and non-Christians as we explore the entanglement of Christians with the state. The Bad Roman Project was created out of the firm belief that as Christians, we are called to follow Christ, not the state. Here is your host, Craig Harguess.
Hey folks, when we see our fellow Christians running to the voting booth, should we point out that government violates the 8th commandment that states, "Thou shalt not steal"? I think we should. I think we should go deeper and point out how government steals your wealth and purchasing power with inflation and taxes. We can also go a little bit deeper and point out how all of government action steals our independence through taxation and inflation. This is why I invited Mike Maharrey back on the show to discuss all of this.
Let's go. Yeah. Left, right, left, right, left. We got our marching orders, man. Left, right. Would you rather serve God than serve Caesar? You feel me? Right. I'm just trying to live what he said. I'm just trying to live.
Mike, how are you doing, my friend?
I am doing great, man. Thanks for having me back on the show. It's one of my favorite podcast names ever.
It's kind of catchy. I've heard that from other folks too, that it's something about just the name. I met with Doug Stewart from Libertarian Christian Institute. They were in Memphis here. I don't know. There was an event going on. There was a bunch of them in town. So I went and met with them, and he goes, just the name, The Bad Roman, is just so cool. And I'm like, yeah, I can't take credit for it. We stole it from, just that one quote that we saw floating around in the Christian anarchist circles, and it kind of stuck. It's turned into a thing now, so we're having a lot of fun with it. I had you on the show in the very beginning of our project, and I was very new to it. I remember messaging you and seeking some advice, to kind of pick your brain about how all this podcasting stuff works, because Godarchy was one of my favorites. When I was started learning about Christian anarchy, I really leaned on you and anarcho-Christian as well to kind of learn, make sure I wasn't going crazy when I was trying to understand all this stuff. You guys really helped me understand that, you're not going crazy. This is a real thing.
Yeah, it's really cool to see how your show's evolved and grown. And I really think it's a testimony to your, I guess, stick-to-itiveness. That's half the battle in podcasting, just consistently putting episodes. I think I read somewhere that the average podcast goes 5 episodes. So it's great that you're out there, because we need more folks that are believers, that understand the destructiveness and really, not to overstate, but the antichrist nature of government and government systems. It's important for that message to get out there. So glad you're out there sounding the horn, so to speak.
Yeah. The last time I had you on the show, like I said, I was very new to it, and I didn't get you to give us some background of yourself. And I like to do that with people on the show. Now, like I said before we started recording, the vast majority of our listeners are going to know who Mike Maharrey is. But just in case there's somebody out there that doesn't know who you are, won't you tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into the topic today.
Yeah, gosh, I could probably talk for not just one, but multiple hours on kind of my journey to this place. But just to kind of sum up, I'm a Christian, and I'm also, I guess, anarchist is the best word. I still haven't settled on a word that I'm really, really comfortable with. I like the term voluntarist, kind of the idea that all of our interactions should be voluntary. We shouldn't be forced and coerced by other people to do this or that. But nobody knows what voluntarist means. So, but whatever it is, that's what I am. And then, of course, I'm also a believer and have been a Christian. Really, I grew up in the Anglican Church, the Episcopal Church, and then was in Baptist and Methodist churches for many years. And now I'm actually exploring Orthodoxy because I'm just kind of disillusioned with some of the stuff that's going on in Protestantism. But that's neither here nor there. The most important thing is I'm a believer in Jesus Christ. I've been involved in little L libertarian stuff for well over a decade now. Kind of got started with the 10th Amendment Center, which I'm still involved with, and we do work to kind of, it's more of a decentralization, and a lot of people will say, oh, you're doing that Constitution stuff, so you can't be an anarchist. And I just tell them I'm a pragmatic anarchist. I mean, we're here, and we want to get there. We've got to take some steps. And I think it's important to have folks that are explaining voluntarism and anarchism in a very pure way so people can grasp that. But we also need to do things in the here and now, I believe, to try to minimize the impact of government on our lives. And that's kind of what we do at the 10th Amendment Center, just through decentralization, trying to break up the monolith that is the federal government. I did my own podcast in the Christian anarchy world for quite a while called Godarchy, and had to set that aside just because of a lot of personal stuff and work stuff that was going on. I'm also very heavily involved in the world of sound money. I work for a company that sells precious metals, physical gold and silver, and produce content for that company, do a podcast for them called The Midweek Memo, and the company's called Money Metals. So I'm a pretty busy guy, and really happy to be able to come on and talk to you, because most of the work that I do is more kind of in the political realm, and it's really nice to be able to be in a platform where I can talk a little bit more openly, where people are going to understand and actually want to hear about how my faith plays into the scheme of things. So that's kind of a succinct thing. Like I said, I could talk about my journey forever, but I don't want to get us too far off topic.
No, it's all good. So at the time of this recording, we're going to drop this on July 4th, which I think is pretty cool, because we're going to kind of get into Independence Day too, with it being an election year. I know the last time I had you on the show, the first time and the last time I had you on the show, I was still just so frustrated with Christians and their support of Donald Trump and all that stuff. And here we are again. I mean, in 2024.
It's like Groundhog Day. It's just the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, and I do so well. I've done so good. I've been so proud of myself to kind of not get into these Facebook debates and just kind of I'll see it. I might drop a thing here or there and just leave it. But the last few days, man, I have lost my mind over this Trump stuff, and I can't. I get frustrated with myself because I know you're not changing anything on social media by doing that. I'm hoping somebody reading along will kind of catch on to what I'm saying. That's my hope. But the conversations I'm having with some of these people, it's almost like they're in a trance. And it reminds me of when prior to the Biden presidency, we were talking about this. We started publishing episodes in 2020. I think you and I recorded the last year of Trump's first presidency, and we talked about Trump quite a bit. And I have so many friends and family who just love this guy and adore him and think he's the savior. He's going to save the nation. And I not to get too far off on Trump, but I'm pretty sure he's going to come up today because of what I want to talk about with inflation. And we know that taxation is theft, but I don't think people take inflation enough. They don't understand it enough to see what's going on, because when I see these folks talking about it, like it's Biden's fault that all this inflation is going on. And I'm like, hang on a second. I read something the other day that there was more money printed in 2020 than any time in history. And that was during Trump's presidency. And that had, to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, because you're the guy that understands this better than I do. But to me, that could lead into this inflation stuff we're seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. That's you've hit the nail on the head. And really, the trajectory of monetary policy continues no matter who is in the White House. Obviously, the president has the authority to appoint the chairman of the Federal Reserve. Biden kept Jerome Powell, who was appointed by Trump. That probably tells you everything that you need to know. In fact, Powell might have preceded Trump. I might have just misspoke. It might have been Obama that appointed Powell. But regardless, monetary policy is designed to benefit whoever is in power. So both parties want the same thing. They want a Federal Reserve that is going to backstop federal spending. And that's really what the money printing does. And in the simplest terms, the Federal Reserve is creating money out of thin air. It does that by buying bonds, which are treasuries, which are the way that the government borrows money. So the Fed buys these bonds, it takes them off the market, it pumps money into the economy, and it holds these bonds on its balance sheet. And that basically creates artificial demand for treasuries. If the Federal Reserve wasn't out there buying U.S. debt, then the government wouldn't be able to borrow as much money as it does. And whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, you want to borrow money because you want to spend it. Now, they might differ to degree on what they want to spend it on, but they all want to spend money. So the money printing machine at the Federal Reserve benefits both parties. And, they talk about Fed independence, like the Federal Reserve is independent from the government. And it's not really, it's more of a branch of the government, but it is independent in the sense that it does the same thing no matter who's in power. It creates money and it incentivizes and facilitates borrowing. And ultimately, we pay for that. You talked about, taxation is theft. Inflation is literally a tax. And that inflation tax is the primary way that the U.S. government funds itself. So, yeah, Trump wants the Federal Reserve to print money. Biden wants the Federal Reserve to print money. Whoever's in there in 20 years is going to want the Federal Reserve to print money because it's to their benefit. And it doesn't have anything to do with like the policies of Biden. He didn't create the price inflation. He just continued the price inflation that's was going on under Trump, that was going on under Obama, that was going on under Bush. We can go back through all time. It's interesting. You can go back and look at the trajectory of spending. And I've seen the data of this going back to the 1940s. So you go back to FDR. And every single administration has borrowed more money than the previous administration before that. So, people talk about, Trump was so much better than Obama. We actually had more borrowing with Trump. And we were on pace to have more borrowing by Trump even before the pandemic. Like he was running Obama-esque deficits before the pandemic, which a lot of people don't realize. I told a lady that once on Facebook and she told me I needed to get Jesus.
I got called woke the other day by a fellow Christian who we used to go to church with because I was pointing out that Israel is slaughtering children in Gaza right now. And She goes, you need to read your Bible. You become too woke.
Yeah. It's funny because we can be woke and then in the next hour we're fascists. So.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So when I hear somebody, a Trump supporter, say that, well, I don't remember grocery prices being like this under Trump. I remember the economy being so great under Trump. I said it was fake because all of his policies, and you mentioned COVID, I mean, all shutting down the economy then, I mean, you can't say that we're seeing now the cause of that, what was going to happen from that.
Right.
And it's so strange to me. And I think this is where my frustration comes from is, and I accuse a lot of people of this all the time, that they got the mind of a goldfish. They cannot remember what happened 4 years ago. They remember, okay, eggs were $2 a dozen, and now they're $6 a dozen. That's what they think. Or gas prices are up, and all this stuff is up. And I'm like, everything he was doing then is what we're seeing the effects of that now. How they can't understand it. And when you point it out to them, I don't think they want to understand it.
Well, that's a lot of it. And, it's interesting. And I know that, a lot of folks in your audience don't care anything about the founders. But I always flash back to these things because of my work at the 10th Amendment Center. And, say what you want about the founding generation. They obviously were government people. Right. And they had their problems. And you look at somebody like John Adams, and during the run up to the American Revolution, he talked so much about liberty and about the danger of government. And then when he was president, he signed the Alien and Sedition Acts, which basically outlawed criticism of the government. It was a complete violation of the whole idea of free speech. So I'm not holding these people up as being the perfect pantheon of good government. But they did have some instincts, especially in their day, that were correct. Especially you can look at somebody like Thomas Jefferson, who is going as far as even wondering whether or not the Constitution shouldn't be changed every 30 years because how can one generation bind the next? Like they were going in that direction, and somewhere we got short-circuited. But one of the things that I think that the founding generation understood very well was the whole idea of factions, and the fact that when you start dividing up into parties, it becomes my team against your team. And sacrificed in all of that is any thought of good policy. It's basically just beating the other team. And that's what we've gotten to. So you've got people on the Trump side of the coin who they want to figure out how to blame everything on Biden. Everything's Biden's fault. Trump was perfect, and everything was rolling along. And then you got the Biden people, and they want to say, oh, look how awful Trump is. He's a fascist. He's going to put us all in concentration camps. He wasn't even that conservative. I mean, let's be really honest about it. But it becomes impossible because of the nature of factions. It becomes impossible for people to think rationally and objectively about what is actually going on. So let's step back a second and look at the trajectory of the economy. And we'll go back to just the Great Recession, 2008, right? We had a massive crash, and we had the worst financial crisis in American history. We had the worst recession since the Great Depression. And, I won't even go back and get into how all of that was set up by the monetary policy that preceded it and blowing up a housing bubble. We don't even need to go into that. Let's just start at 2008. When we had the Great Recession, the Federal Reserve lowered interest rates to zero and ran what is called quantitative easing. Quantitative easing is just a fancy term for printing money. It's all you have to think of. If I say quantitative easing, just imagine the printing press running off dollar bills. Now, obviously, they don't run off physical dollar bills, in the Eccles building, which is where the Fed is. It's all digital, but that's what they're doing. They buy bonds, they buy debt, and they pay for it with money created out of thin air. They inject that money into the economy. During the Great Recession, they ran 3 rounds of quantitative easing and injected nearly $4 trillion into the economy. That's inflation, by definition. And that's one of the problems we have here. People don't understand what inflation is because government people and their academic supporters have kind of muddied up the definition of inflation. If you go back and look at the definition of inflation in a 1970s dictionary, what you'll see is that it is the increase in the money supply and credit, which is exactly what the Fed does. That's inflation. Now, one of the symptoms of inflation is rising prices or price inflation. Now they just call rising prices price inflation. And they don't even talk about the monetary policy of monetary money expansion, right? We don't talk about that at all. We just talk about, we have inflation, that's rising prices. Well, lots of things can cause rising prices, right? I mean, you have supply and demand. If there's a supply shock in the world of oil, gas prices will go up. That's not inflation. That's just rising prices. When we talk about price inflation, what we really mean is when prices throughout the economy all rise at the same time. Now, there can be other things that are going on with different sectors. You could have some prices that are going down, some prices are going out, but all prices are higher than they otherwise would have been when you print more money. And it's just simple. It's simple mathematics. I mean, just think about it. If you had a simple economy where all there were was dollar bills and donuts, okay? And let's say there's $10 in this economy and there's 5 donuts. So therefore, every donut is worth $2. Well, if you suddenly increase that money supply and now there's $20, those donuts aren't going to stay $2. They're going to go up to $4. They're going to double in price just like the money supply because people are going to bid them up. That's all price inflation is. And price inflation is always caused by monetary inflation. But those two definitions have been separated. So now when people talk about inflation, they can blame greedy corporations, Putin's price hikes, voodoo, unicorns, whatever it is. And the Fed gets off scot-free because nobody understands that that's what's driving this. So after the Great Recession, $4 trillion of money created out of thin air, interest rates artificially low at zero for almost a decade. I mean, think about that. They kept interest rates at zero for like 8 years. And all that does is incentivize borrowing, right? When interest rates are low, people are more apt to borrow money because it's cheap. Why not borrow money? I only have to pay 2% interest or whatever it is. So that stimulates the economy for a short amount of time. The problem is that just because you have more money doesn't mean you have more stuff. So under the surface, you have the prices of everything going up. You have misallocations of resources because the signals in the economy that tell people to borrow or spend or save are all messed up. And you end up blowing up a big bubble. And that's exactly what they did after the Great Recession. And if you remember, and most people don't, but if you remember during the first couple of years of the Trump administration, we were talking about, this is the greatest economy in history. It was just the end of a bubble. That's all it was. And this is the thing that people forget. And you're right. We have a microwave mentality, right? We don't remember 30 seconds ago. We've got the 30-second news cycle. We've got however many characters on Twitter. That's the extent of most people's framework. 2008 is like ancient history, right? So in 2018 is when the Fed finally started to normalize interest rates because they were able, because of the dynamics in the economy, they were able to create all of that inflation without actually hitting consumer prices. Where the inflation showed up was in the stock market and in asset markets. All of those things got more and more expensive. Stock market was booming when Trump was elected. All of that was a result, or not all of it, but a lot of that was the result of this monetary policy. In 2018, they started to try to normalize interest rates because they were starting to see the price inflation. And they got to like, I can't remember if it was 2.25% or 2.5%. And in the fall of 2018, there was a huge stock market crash. And everybody was worried about a recession. And everybody was thinking, the economy's getting wobbly. And at that time in 2019, so this is a year before COVID, the Federal Reserve had already gone back to lowering interest rates and we're already starting to do the money printing thing again, even before COVID. And I don't think hardly anybody remembers that because everybody's like, oh, Trump was just awesome and the economy was great. And then there was COVID. No, the economy was starting to in early stages of collapse in 2019. And then basically COVID bailed them out because when they shut down the government, then that gave them an excuse to go all the way back to zero with the interest rates and go all the way back to the money printing. In a little over a year, the Federal Reserve created over $4 trillion more on top of what they had created in 2008. It was actually closer to $5 trillion. So they pumped all of this money into the economy. They shut the government, shut everything down, so nobody could spend anything. So everybody had money. Nobody was producing anything because all of a sudden we started getting these stimmy checks. And I said at the time, you can go back and listen to some of this stuff. I was working for Shift Gold at the time. You can go back and look where I was talking about this is going to cause price inflation. It's a recipe for price inflation. What did we get? We got price inflation because in the end, economics always wins. And so we got, we fast forward to today where the Fed has raised interest rates significantly, very quickly, trying to stem that price inflation. And I'm telling you, within the next year, 2 years, we're going to see another major collapse in the economy because that's the way the cycle works. And whoever's president next is going to get blamed for it. But it really goes all the way back to 2008. So, blame Janet Yellen and Jerome Powell. They're really the ones that are responsible for what I call monetary malfeasance. And presidents just play on it, right? And, during the Trump years when the stock market was booming because we were still enjoying the windfalls of the 2008 easy money policy, everybody's like, oh, Trump is great. It's the greatest economy in the world. And now, those same people are trying to blame Biden for the fact that their eggs are more expensive. No, Biden has nothing to do with eggs. Now, I'm not saying that Biden is great. I mean, the way I look at it, pretty much all of these politicians are basically the same, right? They're all sociopaths as far as I'm concerned. So I'm not giving them credit for anything, but I think sometimes they take way too much of the blame. And that was probably a way too long-winded explanation of kind of what's going on with the world of money. I don't even remember what the question was now.
No, we were just talking about inflation. I think I started with how a lot of these folks, like I remember how the economy was so great during Trump, and this is what you were explaining this whole time, and I appreciate that. And when this show is getting shared by our listeners to their Trump-supporting friends and family, I now need them to understand, too, this is not us trying to bail out Biden, because I'm with you, Mike, that I see them as all the same sociopath as well.
Right.
They're all maniacs to me.
And to be fair, Biden has implemented some policies that have exacerbated this situation, particularly when you look at something like oil and gasoline prices. The policies that he's implemented that have limited oil and gas production, a lot of this green energy stuff is putting additional weight on the economy. But some of the stuff that Trump did also put additional weight on the economy, tariffs and all of that kind of stuff that Trump was all into. So, you get bad policies from all sides, but it's always rooted in this monetary policy. I say you kind of have government economic policy, and it's sitting on a foundation of Fed monetary policy. And the Fed monetary policy is really, I've called it the engine that drives the largest government in the history of the world, which arguably is what we have today. And if it weren't for the Federal Reserve in there backstopping it, I mean, they literally make it possible to borrow and spend more than the government otherwise would be able to. And so you have to look at that. And no matter who's in office, if Trump had been reelected, we still would have had the same inflation. That's just the fact of the matter, is because it's a monetary phenomenon. It's not Putin. It's not supply chains. It's not greedy corporations. It's not, Taylor Swift. I heard Taylor Swift the other day was the cause of inflation because people pay a lot of money for Taylor Swift tickets, So no, it's none of that. It's Jerome Powell and his little minions at the Federal Reserve out there cranking out dollars on the monetary policy or on the monetary printing press.
I've heard Taylor Swift blamed for a lot of things, but not for inflation. That's a new one for me.
That was the first time I'd heard it too. I promised myself that I was going to catalog that in my reasons for price inflation.
That poor girl can't get away from blame for anything. Hey folks, do you like salsa? I love salsa. I have come up with a fire recipe, and we have been shipping this homemade salsa all across the country. If you like salsa and want a cool way to support the project and spread the message of no king but Christ, then holler at us. You can reach us at badromansalsa@gmail.com or visit the official Bad Roman Salsa Facebook page and message us there. Thank y'all so much for your continued support. Now let's get back to the show. Well, you mentioned tariffs during that. I want to talk about that as well because, and I don't want to make predictions. It seems like we're heading towards another Trump presidency. It appears that way. I would be surprised if it didn't happen. I kind of think it would be funny if Biden won again so I could see all these Trump heads explode. To me, that would be kind of funny.
Yeah. On the other hand, it's fun watching the left's heads explode too. So either way, you're going to get the popcorn.
Yeah. And they're just going to keep fighting with each other no matter what. I mean, no matter what's said, it seems like they're just going to fight with each other. But I remember, so a lot of what, like I said, a lot of what we're talking about today kind of goes way over my head. Now, I asked you kind of dumb it down for me before we started recording, because you've done that. I appreciate that. But the tariff thing is, when Trump started talking about tariffs and putting tariffs on like anything coming in from China or whatever, to me, the way I was looking at it, I was like, well, that's really not penalizing China because China's just going to raise their prices, which in turn is just another tax on the American citizen, right? So am I understanding that correctly? Because I try to point that out to these folks about these Trump supporters about this, and they just dismiss me as a Biden supporter or something, or a liberal or whatever. And I'm like, no, because all China's going to do is raise their prices, and it's penalizing you. Trump's not helping you by putting tariffs on China or any goods coming in from any other country. He's not helping you. He's hurting you. Am I understanding that correctly?
Absolutely. You couldn't have explained it any more perfectly or clearly. A tariff is literally a tax. Okay? So who pays the tax? Well, China's not paying the tax. You're paying the tax, right? Because when China makes a thing, a widget, and puts it on a boat, so you're paying for the cost of producing the widget and whatever profit the company that makes it is going to earn. Then you're paying the transportation cost to get it over here. And then if they slap a tariff on it, then you're paying the tariff. All of that is in the final price tag when you buy the thing at wherever you buy it from, Walmart or whatever. So it is literally a tax. It is literally raising the price of what you pay for things. Now, there is a benefit to certain people. One of my favorite economists was Bastiat. Okay, French economist back in the 1800s. He's the one that came up with the whole broken window fallacy. The idea that if you break a window, that's good for the economy. And he explains when there's any type of economic thing, any type of economic activity, any type of economic policy, you have to look at the seen and the unseen. You have to look at the things that you can easily point out, which is what the politicians always point out, but you also have to try to look at the unseen impacts of whatever's been done. So the whole idea of the broken window fallacy is if I break my window, that means I have to call a glass company to repair my window. And that guy repairing my window is going to get money from me to repair my window. And then he'll have money so he can buy a new suit. And then the suit maker will benefit because he'll earn money and then he can go buy a car or whatever. So they'll say that that broken window created all of this economic activity and that was good. But they're not looking at the unseen, right? The unseen is I had planned on buying my kids a new pair of shoes, but now I had to spend that money on a window. So whoever made my kids' shoes that I'm not buying now, they're out that money, right? Nobody ever sees that part. Nobody ever considers the unseen. And Bastiat said a good economist considers both the seen and the unseen. And unfortunately, we don't have very many good economists in this world. That includes most of the economists. A lot of them are shills for various politicians or political parties. So going back to tariffs, the unseen impact of that, I mean, there are seen impacts of that. If you raise the price of a product from China to make it the same as the price for something that was produced in America, then that, yes, that benefits American manufacturers because their stuff is all of a sudden more competitive because the tariff is raising the price of the Chinese goods. And that seems great. And that's what the selling point is. It's going to help American manufacturing. We're going to bring it back to America. But the unseen thing is that I'm now paying more than I otherwise would have had to. So it is a tax, and people should at least recognize it as such. And I get the appeal. We're going to protect our domestic production. Ultimately, when everything comes out in the wash, that is not going to bring the most benefit to the most people. It's going to benefit some people. And I think people should also be clear on this. Joe Biden has not eliminated any of the tariffs that Trump imposed. Okay. And I was reading the other day, he's talking about more tariffs. What's the difference? Right. You know, I people all the time, you know, they act like Donald Trump, oh my God, he's a fascist. I literally saw a person the other day say that if Trump gets reelected, he's going to put people in concentration camps. What? No. You know, he's a liberal from New York. He's not a freaking fascist. And then on the other hand, you know, you've got people that are talking about Joe Biden and how he's just run this economy. They're the same. The policies are the same. And I'll give you another one. I'm getting way off track here, but now I'm on a rant.
Let's go.
I love seeing the pickup trucks with the bumper stickers, and they have the come and take it, right? And then they have Trump. Trump was worse on guns than Obama.
Yeah.
Obama never implemented any actual gun control.
Yeah.
We had Trump. He gave us the bump stock ban. Now people say, oh, bump stock, that doesn't really matter. Yeah, it's no difference. The ATF was more aggressive under Trump than it was under Obama. So really, if you want to get down to it, Obama was the gun president.
I've pointed that out more than once to him. And I think you and I talked about this the first time I had you on a little bit too, because I was actually not too long ago, I was explaining this to a Trump supporter at work. And I said, go back and look at the gun policies of Obama and Trump. Trump was worse on the Second Amendment than Obama was. He goes, no, that's not true.
Yep.
That's not true. I said, he, in one sentence, violated the Second and Fourth Amendment in just one sentence. I like to take guns first, due process later. That's a violation of the Second and Fourth Amendment right off the bat. He goes, well, I don't remember him saying that. I said, go look it up.
Go look it up.
And then you mentioned the bump stock ban. I said, regardless of whether you use a bump stock or not, he signed an executive order, which did not go through Congress. He signed an executive order to do this, which is a violation of the Second Amendment. He does not have the authority to do that under the Constitution. You mentioned our listeners don't really care about the founders. I don't think that's true, because I think a lot of us kind of come to this, a lot of us, not all of us, come to this through our understanding of the Constitution and our understanding of the founding era, because then I mentioned that to you the first time on, my study of all that led me directly into my anarchism.
Right.
And I think a lot of people have taken that route.
I tell people that the 10th Amendment is the gateway drug, you know, because you do recognize we would be better off. We would be more free. We would have more liberty. We would have a better economy if the government actually stayed within the bounds of the Constitution. Now, we can argue and debate about whether any government is ever going to stay within the bounds of any instrument. And the answer to that is probably no. But it is at least a starting point to recognize that, growing centralized government is detrimental to our liberty. So it's a good starting place with folks that when you say the word anarchism, they're going to go, oh, well, we can't have that. It's a great gateway drug. And again, from a practical standpoint, it's at least a way to get some policies that are decentralizing that will create a little bit of room for liberty. If people are inclined to engage in the political process at all. And we could, I understand people who don't.
I love this. And we have kind of bounced around a little bit, but I love this because it kind of reminds me of some of the stuff that I studied. And you mentioned the 10th Amendment. This is perfect, man. And we are bouncing around, and we'll get back to inflation and tariffs and stuff here in a second. And I like a good Mike Maharrey rant anyway. So
everybody does.
You mentioned the 10th Amendment. During the COVID stuff, and when they were trying, when Biden signed that executive order about the vaccine and all that stuff, and my job was, and this might get me in trouble if they ever decide to listen to this podcast, but they were trying to implement that. If you didn't get a shot, they were going to charge you $200 a month or something on our insurance or something. And
right.
So Tennessee, I live outside of Memphis, and the state of Tennessee passed a law that said you cannot force your employees to get a vaccine. Okay. And so we had this meeting about this vaccine. People were really up in arms, and I was hyping people up the entire time before this meeting. And I kind of went back to my roots of understanding especially the 10th Amendment. I walked into this meeting, and I talked to HR, and I talked to all the big bosses, and I said, listen, the state of Tennessee just passed this law saying you can't do this.
Right.
Tennessee law is going to trump federal law. There's not a federal law, by the way. It's an executive order. Tennessee law, if there was a federal law, Tennessee law is going to trump it per the 10th Amendment. And they looked at me and their eyes just glossed over like this was new information to them. Well, we've got attorneys and they seem to know what they're talking about. I'm like, you're setting yourself up for some lawsuits. I'm just telling you that right now. Right. I had to kind of revert back to my understanding that to kind of talk, because I can't go in there and say, hey, I'm an anarchist and you can't tell me what to do. They're not going to understand that for sure. But if I could go in there and say, hey, well, this is what the Constitution says, and this is supposed to be the law of the land.
Right.
You can't make me do this.
Let me drop some truth bombs on folks. People in the in the anarchist wing of libertarianism love Lysander Spooner, right? And Spooner's most probably well-known quote within our circles is the whole quote about whether the Constitution be one thing or another, it failed to do what it was said to do, and therefore it's unfit to exist. That was a paraphrase. So everybody thinks of Spooner as kind of the anti-Constitution guy. But in the 1850s, he actually wrote a very long essay. It was called In Defense of Fugitive Slaves. And in that, he actually talked about the fact that the people have a right to resist an unconstitutional law. So even Spooner made these constitutional arguments. He said the right of the people to resist an unconstitutional law is absolute and unqualified from the moment the law is enacted. And it's interesting because he almost sounds like one of the founders, right? James Iredell was from North Carolina. He was very influential in North Carolina politics, very influential in the ratification of the Constitution in North Carolina. He was a Supreme Court justice later on. And he said that people, quote, would resist if the government usurped powers not delegated to it. So what I'm kind of getting at here is that the people's refusal to resist government overreach is what got us to where we are today, right? It's not the Constitution's fault. It's just words on paper. Even James Madison talked about how the Constitution was nothing but a parchment barrier. Paper doesn't stop anybody. It takes action. It always comes back to human action. And the fact that people didn't resist that is the reason we have the largest, most powerful government in the world micromanaging our lives. It's the resistance or the refusal to cooperate which actually keeps governments in check. That's the whole history and story of the American Revolution. The British overreached their hand, and the American colonists said, we're not doing this. And as a result, I mean, it ended up being a war. I'm not advocating for war here, don't get me wrong. And I'm not talking about resistance with guns. I'm talking about just not doing things that you're told to do. When enough people don't do something, it doesn't happen, right? It's just, I use this analogy a lot, and you'll appreciate it living in Texas, because I've experienced this in Texas myself.
Well, I'm from Texas. I live in Tennessee.
That's right. You're from Texas. It happens everywhere, though. The speed limit says 65. Ain't nobody driving 65, right? And I've driven through Houston. The average speed is about 80. on, through Houston. If you're going 65, you're getting run over. Okay. There is no way that the government can make everybody drive 65 miles an hour. That's why nobody is, right? That's true of most things. The reason that we have the government control over us that we have is because we allow the government to control us. That's the bottom line. And, it's interesting. I've been doing some writing lately about FDR's gold confiscation. And for folks who might not be familiar, in 1930, I want to say 36, the Great Depression was rolling. And at that point, the U.S. government was still basically on a gold standard. They had to maintain 40% of the amount of money in circulation in gold. So if they got to where the money in circulation was more than 40%, they couldn't create any more money. At that point, the government is spending money hand over fist trying to deal with the Great Depression. And they were running out of gold. The gold was going overseas because people were recognizing that the U.S. was abusing its money creation. And they're like, no, we want to have the gold. So that's why President Roosevelt decided, hey, we've got to get rid of the public's gold and get it in our storehouses so we can keep printing money. So he issued an executive order. And it was a gold confiscation order, is what you'll often hear it referred to. And it required basically people to turn in the gold that they had in their possession under a certain amount. There was a very small amount of gold that you could actually keep. And the fact of the matter is, they only got about 25% of the gold that was in private hands with that executive order, because people just refused to do it. The gold that got turned in was simply because people felt patriotic, or they thought, I've got to follow the law, and they just did it. So what I'm getting at here is if you're going to blame anybody for the size and scope of government, it's not the Constitution's fault. It's not the founders' fault. It's our fault because we let it happen. And Spooner put it this way. He said, it is a maintenance of the Constitution itself. This is resistance. It is a maintenance of the Constitution itself by keeping the government within the Constitution. So we need more of that and less submission, right? We need more people who are willing to use marijuana, even though the government tells them not to. I mean, and that's essentially what has nullified marijuana prohibition. Enough people were like, I'm not doing this. And so finally government followed and said, okay, well, we can't really stop you. So we'll just pretend like we thought it was okay all along. And I think this is a key thing that folks need to wrap their heads around. If you don't like what the government is doing, ultimately it's your fault. It's the fault of the people. It's not this amorphous constitution or something. That it's up to us. And I am of the opinion that it's really impossible to keep government in check. The only way to do that is to not have a government at all. Government is always going to grow. People in power are always going to seek more power. So that's the ultimate solution. But in the meantime, stop letting them get away with trampling all over your rights and your freedom. It's absurd and it makes me angry.
Well, it should. And I agree with you. I think that the more people that say no, there's more of us than there are of them. And the more people that say no, they can't do anything about it. Exactly. Some people might go to jail. Some people might get murdered by the state. But in the end, there's more of us. And I think that's great, because I agree. The more people that just say no, just say no. There's a lot of power in the word no. Yeah, it's interesting to go back to the early days of the legalization of marijuana. And really it preceded this, but kind of the first huge step was in 1996, is when California legalized medical marijuana. I don't think people recognize today just how bold that was back in 1996 and how many people sacrificed to make that happen in 1996. I think most people get the impression of, California passed the law and then there was medical marijuana everywhere. That's not how it went down at all. When they passed that law, the feds aggressively tried to crack down and stop it. And I am told from people who were on the ground at that time, that what would happen is that they would open these medical marijuana dispensaries and the feds would raid them and arrest everybody there and confiscate the product, et cetera, et cetera. And then as soon as the feds were gone, somebody would go in there and reopen it. But people were willing to go to jail
for a plant. It makes me wonder. I get frustrated at conservatives and the gun people, because their solution is, well, we're going to go sue in federal court. What's that going to do? You're going to get the federal government to tell the federal government to stop doing something? No, it's not going to work, right? And I joke with people on the right all the time that you guys need to get the trying not to be crude in my assessment, the gonads of the weed people. Gun people are way bigger wimps than weed people, because weed people are just willing to have weed whether anybody tells them to or not. But the gun people are like, oh, well, the government told me I got to give my gun back, so I guess I better do it. So it really, I think that's an important message for folks. And, obviously we have to pick our battles. I don't want to go to jail. So there is the element of self-preservation. But I do have lines in the sand that I'm just not going to cross. And there's a lot of things that I will do because I know that I can do it and get away with it, even though I'm not supposed to. Everybody was all excited here in Florida. I think it was last year they passed what they call constitutional carry. Basically, you can carry a handgun concealed without a permit in Florida now. I was doing that for years, and people are like, "Oh, this is great! I can carry my gun now." I'm like, "What kind of wuss were you that you wouldn't carry it before?"
Right. Yeah, I've heard that, especially the same thing in Tennessee. They've got constitutional carry, and I'm like, "You've always had that right. All you had to do was just do it." Just the asking for permission thing's got to stop at some point with people, and we live alongside this state. We know they exist, but if the law's immoral, it's immoral. And it's okay for a Christian to say no.
Exactly.
To an immoral law. And I think Christians should probably be the ones to do that. Going back to the COVID stuff, when churches were just shut down because the government told them to, that would really frustrated me with churches. I was like, you should have been the first one to say, no, I don't think I will shut down.
I know you've done a pretty deep dive into the very early church, like the pre-Constantinian Roman church. And their whole existence was basically illegal, right? They were constantly being persecuted and constantly being told, no, you can't meet and you can't have this religion. And they did it anyway. That's why we have martyrs.
They did it even in the face of death. I think I do stress a lot about the early church, because I wish, Christians would kind of take more interest in that. Go back and read some of this stuff. Read the stuff from the early church, because if you see how they were behaved. I've got a cat that I named Perpetua. Perpetua was an early church martyr. And this lady was stoic. This lady was brave. I'm fascinated by the early church. I still am. When we first started this, I got really interested in it. I still study some of that stuff along the way to kind of keep my brain fresh on it too, because I like to bring that stuff up with Christians. I like to point to the early church when I'm talking about, okay, no king but Christ. Nobody understood that better than the early church did. They did this. They understood no king but Christ all the way to their death, even if it was going to get them killed.
Right. That's the whole basis of your the name of your show. Right. Bad Roman.
Right.
Because Christians were considered bad Romans because they wouldn't do certain things that were contrary to the teachings of Christ, that were required by the civil government. The Roman government required you. It was part of your citizenship, your patriotism, so to speak, to go do your offering at the temple of whatever Roman god you're supposed to be giving an offering to that day. That was part of it. And they were like, well, this is important to our civic existence. Why can't you just do it? And they're like, no, we can't, because we only serve God and Jesus Christ. That was the line that they drew in the sand.
Acts 5 says Acts 5 said we are to obey God rather than man. I had this thrown in my face yesterday online in one of these stupid arguments I was getting involved with. I could not get out of this argument for some reason. And he quoted Romans 13. I was like, did you read Acts 5? And then I was like, did you read Romans 12? And then he kind of went silent. Then I woke up today and he keeps bringing up all this other stuff. And I'm like, I asked you to go read the words of Jesus. I don't care about all these laws. And we were talking about immigration is what we were talking about. I said, I don't care about all these immigration laws. I said, go read the words of Jesus. This is how a Christian is supposed to look at this, not through the eyes of the government, through the eyes of Jesus. And I could not get him to do it. He kept bringing up, they called them criminals and this. And I'm like, where's the victim at? Then he started calling them rapists. I was like, man, I've been working alongside immigrants for years in printing, for years. And all these folks are trying to do is feed their families. That's it. And they're some of the hardest working folks I've ever been around in my life. Some of the nicest people I've been around in my life. They just want to survive. And you want to put them in a cage because they broke some stupid immoral law that the government has set about an imaginary line. Miss me with that. This is where I start getting heated and I start going on rants with people about this stuff. I said, because you're not looking at this through the eyes of Jesus. You're looking at this through the eyes of the government and an immoral law. Stop it. Stop it.
Exactly. Our law is love your neighbor.
Right.
I can't love my neighbor if I'm locking them in a cage because they crossed a line somebody drew on a map.
Yeah, exactly.
That's just absurd to me. And the hatred and vilification that we're capable of, the scapegoating, it breaks my heart. It really does.
Yeah.
And I think as believers, that's where I get to the point. It's like, I don't even want to talk about politics anymore.
Right.
Because it's this stuff, when you get into that, when you're trying to lock, and yeah, you know what? Some drug dealers do come across the border. That's true. We got plenty of drug dealers of our own, right? I'm sure there's drug dealers in my neighborhood.
Yeah.
If we're going to really be honest about it. And they're probably not from Central or South America.
Right.
So yeah, it's frustrating.
Yeah, I always point that out too. I was like, you're accusing these people of this, but there's people that are citizens of the United States that do the exact same thing you're doing. Are you going to kick them out of the country too?
Right.
I mean, come on. It's such the straw man arguments. When I start hearing straw man arguments, I lose interest in the conversation.
Yeah.
I might keep it going for a little bit just for the sake of the audience to see if somebody might latch on to what I'm saying, because I do get messages from people from time to time wanting to know more about what I'm saying.
Right.
And I appreciate that. But if it continues, I got to go. I'm going to go pet my cat. I'm going to be like, I get tired of talking politics. Sometimes I've got cats I'd rather hang out with and talk to you about how you think Donald Trump is great, or how much you hate Biden, or how much you love Biden. I'm tired of that. I'm tired of it. And I could get enough of that out on this show that I don't have to do that throughout the week. Now, if the conversation comes up and if they want to have a real conversation, I am totally down with that. But if you're just going to call me a liberal woke person because I'm pointing out the stupidity of Donald Trump, you're being a child. I've got a nephew that's way smarter than you. I can have a conversation with him about this. So
I've got to tell this anecdote because it's funny. Well, it's funny in a sad way. And it kind of goes back to the whole economic thing that no matter who you've got in power, the trajectory is the same, right? We get more spending, we get more debt. We get that no matter who's in office. And I can actually go back and show you the numbers of where every presidential administration has left office with more debt than when they went in. It's just a fact.
Yeah.
And this lady was talking about, she was, we got to get Trump back. And Trump was so good. And when Trump was in office, he was lowering the deficits and the debt. I'm like, what? I mean, that's not even an opinion. That's not a thing. So I actually pointed out the numbers because, I've written a billion articles. So I've got all these numbers. And I laid it out. The fact that before COVID, the Trump administration was already on tap to run a deficit over $1 trillion. And that had never been done since the Obama administration. And Obama at least had the excuse of we're in, this worst depression since the Great Depression. And obviously you're going to have higher deficits when the economy is bad. Trump was doing that when the economy was supposedly great. $1 trillion deficit before COVID. And you know what her response was? You need to get Jesus. I mean, what do you even do with that, right? I mean, I tried, but that's the mentality that you end up with when you get into this left-right paradigm, this cult of personality, right? I had a guy try to tell me the other day that Joe Biden is one of the most with it presidents ever. There's no way you can objectively look at this man and say that he doesn't have dementia.
Yeah, for sure.
But they can't see it because they're so wrapped up in this cult of personality. And I honestly think a lot of people are looking for a savior.
Oh, 100%.
And I've got news for you. You're not going to get a savior in Washington, D.C.
100%. We're seeing it. This is one thing where my frustration has been the last few days with these Trump supporters. And somebody told me, well, I don't think they really see him as a savior. I said, are you seeing the stuff that they're posting about him?
They do.
I mean, I shared a song they wrote about him, and it's called The Chosen One. Go look at my Facebook page when we get down here. That YouTube video's on there. I'm not this is the most absurd thing I've ever seen. And I used to accuse Obama supporters of being worshipers of Obama, which they were.
They were.
But Trump supporters have taken this to a whole different level. And they are seeking a savior through politics, through Trump. And I'm like, if you're a Christian and you're saying this, you're missing the entire point of who your savior is.
I mean, can you imagine if you took the name off and just take a Trump character and dump him back into, say, 1980, say the Reagan years? Everybody would brand him a raving liberal. I mean, that's really what he is. He's a moderate liberal from New York that suddenly has taken the mantle of conservatism. Like, it doesn't even make sense internally.
Not at all. I want to ask you one more question. I'm going to get you to plug whatever you want to plug too. We're going about an hour now. This is going to publish on Independence Day, air quote Independence Day, the 4th of July.
Right.
I want to ask Mike Maharrey how independent he feels. And I think you brought up a really good point earlier. We just got to start saying no and doing what we're going to do. And just enough of us say no. But how independent does Mike Maharrey feel living in this country as people are celebrating at their barbecues today on Independence Day?
So let's look at Canada. Canada it's got its problems, right? They're maybe a little bit ahead of us in terms of how much they've embraced socialism. They've got the socialist medical care and whatnot. But really, I know a lot of Canadians from playing hockey. I hang out with them in the locker room. So, I've got a pretty good thumb on the pulse of Canadian thought. They're basically as free as the United States. They never had a revolution.
Yeah.
Right? So we had this war. We shed all of this blood for independence, and we basically ended up being just a little bit better than Canada.
I don't know if I should laugh at that or not, or cry about that.
No, I mean, I do. I say that partly to be funny, but it is a fact. And I've said this before. I've made the argument to other people, and I'm going to go deep into my Christian anarchism now. When you try to make a change in society, in government, using violence, you're simply using the same tool that everything was built on to start with, right? You're not really changing that foundation. Government is based on violence, force, and coercion. So we had this revolution, we shed all this blood, but it never dealt with that fundamental issue that we still have violence, force, and coercion. Now, I do think that some of the folks in the founding generation, I think if the trajectory of thought had continued the way it was, I think we would be much closer to the ideas of anarchism than we are. Somewhere along the line, it got short-circuited. Maybe that was, I don't know. I can't really tell you when it was. But, you look at somebody again like Thomas Jefferson, who was at least wondering out loud, can one generation bind the next with the Constitution? So they were thinking about those things. We got short-circuited along the way. And I think that that's largely because nobody ever addressed the violence, force, and coercion, right? So as long as that's in the system, you're going to end up with the same thing over and over again. We could have another revolution today. We could throw off the tyrants. We could drain the swamp. If we don't address that fundamental issue and come to an agreement as human beings that, you know what, I can't use violence to force you to do my will, even if my will is good, right? Until we get to that point, we're not going to have true independence and true freedom. So, we had a revolution. I will grant you that a lot of the ideas that they espoused were fantastic. I think that in many ways they were heading in the right direction, but they laid it on the same foundation. And we're right back to where we were today. We fought the largest empire in the world to become the largest empire in the world. And so, no, I don't feel independent. Now, people say, well, Mike, if you don't like it, then you can go somewhere else that's better. Well, no. I mean, first off, that's like, the guy that lives in the neighborhood where the mob is taken over that I'm supposed to leave because of the mob. It's not my fault. The mob is the problem, not me. But the fact of the matter is, yes, America, the United States, we do enjoy a certain amount of freedom that some other countries don't. No doubt about it. But to say that we are really free, when we have bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. telling us how much water we can put in our toilet, what kind of light bulbs we can screw into our light fixtures, what kind of plant we can put into our body, on top of going around and killing people all over the world for the sake of the empire. No, we are not any better. And I will say this, and it will offend a lot of people, but the United States is just like Great Britain, which was just like Rome, which was just like Persia, which is just like Babylon. It is all a progression of Babylon. The U.S. government is antichrist and evil, just like every government and human kingdom was before it. The only true kingdom is the kingdom of Christ. That's the kingdom that, if we're believers in Jesus Christ, that's the kingdom we need to be seeking. And we can't have allegiance to God's kingdom, which is based on, peace and harmony and loving your neighbor, and also serve the state, which is based on coercing your neighbor to do what you want them to do. So that's how I feel about independence. I am independent because I am a believer in Jesus Christ. That's where my independence comes. It's never going to come from a political system that somebody implements in this world.
Very, very, very well said, my friend. And I think that's a perfect way to end the show. That was beautiful. Why don't you, before I let you go ahead and plug whatever you want to plug? I mean, you said you're working on another podcast, so just tell everybody where they can find that. Anything else you want people where they can reach out to you and learn more about what Mike Maharrey's doing, let us know.
Well, I'm doing content for Money Metals, which is a company that sells physical gold and silver, and you can go to moneymetals.com. If you go to moneymetals.com/news, you can see what I'm writing about. I do about 2 articles every day, primarily dealing with the gold and silver markets, sound money, the Fed, inflation, some of the stuff that we've touched on today. If you want to take a deep dive into that stuff, that's a great resource. I also have my podcast hosted over there. It's called the Money Metals Midweek Memo. And I do about a 30-minute show where I just talk about everything from finance and investing to this monetary policy stuff. I talk a lot about the monetary policy stuff because, quite frankly, the government is destroying our money. So we need sound money. We need monetary competition. I talk about a lot of that kind of stuff over there. So check that out. Also, if you're inclined to be involved in the political world, if you're not, that's cool. Go do your thing. If you are, I would love for folks to check out 10th Amendment Center, 10thamendmentcenter.com. Our strategy is decentralization, which I think is the first step. I think the biggest threat to liberty is concentrated government in one place. If we're going to have government, at least let's split it up, split the power up, the jurisdictions up, and let them compete against each other in kind of a marketplace. It mutes their power. So 10thamendmentcenter.com, all spelled out. And then I have my own website, michaelmaharrey.com, which I haven't put anything on in quite a while, but you can go back and find episodes of my old podcast, Thoughts from a Hairy Head. I have music there and other resources. And godarchy.org is still up. My old podcast episodes are still there. I think they're still accessible, although I've had trouble with the server that they're on. But there's definitely a lot of articles over there relating to Christian anarchism, voluntarism, and those types of things. So you can check that out at godarchy.org.
Well, man, I appreciate this, and I appreciate, getting to speak with you. Like I said, I've always been fascinated by you, and you're doing a lot of great work, and I appreciate the work you're doing. I'm sorry it took so long to get you back on the show. I think you were on episode 6, and I think this will be episode 112 on July 4th. So I apologize for not getting you back on sooner, but we'll have to make this, I'll get you back on again sooner than 4 years from now if we're still doing this.
Yeah, I'd love to come back, and I want to express my appreciation to you and what you're doing. I've told people this. Bad Roman is one of my favorite podcast names ever, and just the fact that you're on episode 112, that shows your stick-to-itiveness, your dedication to this cause. That's a lot of hard work, and we need your voice out there. We need more voices that are dedicated to Christ and that also understands the evil that government is. So I appreciate you and what you're doing, and I've been following along for a long time, and I love the fact that you're very consistent in your messaging, and I hope more people discover what you're doing, because it's a fantastic resource.
All right, that means a lot coming from you. I really do appreciate the kind words and the encouragement. Yeah, there's a lot of hard work that goes into it, and I'm glad that you appreciate that, because you understand what goes into the stuff like this.
I just want to say, folks that are listening, support this. I don't know what you do to as far as supporting the show, but folks can send a few nickels your way.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we've got a spot fund set up where people can donate to. We get a little bit here and there for there. It doesn't pay the bills, because my producer, she requires to be paid, and she deserves it. She's great at what she does. We also got this salsa thing. If anybody likes salsa, that's another thing that is supporting the show. If you like salsa, reach out to us. I've been making salsa for about 6 months now, and it's kind of blowing up, and it's got the Bad Roman label on it and everything.
I saw the other day you had like a pickup truck load of salsa. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I went and did a farmer's market I think it was last Saturday, and did quite well. They said June is they do this once a month out there. It's out there in Millington, Tennessee. It's out there on a farm, a legit farm.
Nice.
And it's kind of secluded. It was really cool out there. And they say June is slow, and I did quite well out there. So I'm going to do it every month, I think, except October. I'm going to do one here locally where I live in October. But
cool. They
say it picks up as the year goes on. So the salsa thing is really kind of helping me support the show as well. So if you like salsa, holler at me. I've been shipping it all over the country too. So.
All right. Well, I appreciate it. And it was a pleasure. It was fun.
All right, Mike, I'm going to let you get out of here, and we'll do this again for sure.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Bad Roman Podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you find your podcasts to never miss an episode. And while you're at it, if you like what you heard, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes. Or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, it really helps people find us. 100% of donations are given to local charities in Memphis, Tennessee. To learn more about the Bad Roman Project and to find show notes, please visit thebadroman.com.